in with us, and the subject is that English devolution. Not quite what it seems, I'll suggest.
Is anything ever quite what it seems, Brian? Yes, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill came out last week. I was talking about lawfare earlier, and actually this sort of constant onslaught of legislation, bills, acts running to quite literally thousands of pages per week is the kind of sharp end of that, essentially. It's designed to overwhelm us. It makes it almost impossible to keep up with what the government's trying to do. This is one of the things that landed last week. So this is the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill. It's not been enacted yet, but it is on its way to becoming law. And this sits in a long process of devolution that nobody asked for. We actually voted against it, but they decided to go ahead with it anyway. And this latest iteration comes from Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, who I like to call affectionately Big Ange. She took to LBC to talk about the bill, try and sell it to us, saying Labour was elected to deliver change, and our English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill will do just that, change, transformation of the country. She continues, that means handing power back to where it belongs, to local leaders with skin in the game, so they can make decisions on what really matters to their communities. Skin in the game, it's one of those terms that's been heavily focus grouped. All of the politicians are using it. I actually think it's probably quite misleading. Skin in the game normally means that you've got some money or a proper interest in something, and I don't think that any of these leaders do, to be honest with you. They're just there on a grift. She then continues to say, we will drive the biggest transfer of power out of Whitehall to our regions in a generation and make devolution the default setting. And again, this is where I think things start to get really misleading. We've talked about this a lot. This idea that we're going to drive transfer of power out of Whitehall and into the regions is very, very misleading. Essentially, what's happening is that the regions are becoming departments of Whitehall, right? And actually, the best evidence to support that came just under a week after Starmer was voted into Downing Street on July the 4th last year, when you had all of the Metro mayors go up for their big meet and greet on the 9th of July, I believe it was. So about 5 days after the general election, they were some of the first people invited into Downing Street to talk about the implementation of this new system of governance, right? It's got nothing about devolution of power. Angela Rayner continues to say that we'll give local people a new community right to buy, to save much loved community assets like pubs and shops, and to have a bigger say in shaping their local area through effective neighbourhood governance. This right to buy thing is really important. This is a shift towards a communitarian system, right? That's absolutely what this is. Pubs should not be owned by the community. They're owned by a landlord. Right? Shops should not be owned by the community. They should be owned by people who use them as shops. That's what they're for. What all of this ignores is the fact that our economic system has been destroyed over the past 50 years by the people who are actually behind this policy agenda, ultimately. Yeah, shops should be used as shops. Pubs should be used as shops, as pubs even. We shouldn't be changing the fundamental structure of the system in order to align it with this new communitarian vision that no one actually really understands, right? Let's be completely honest about this. She also says there that this is all about effective neighbourhood governance. Yeah, so again, this is about control at a neighbourhood level. And she then goes on finally in this article to say, we should provide a link to, she's going to have a look at it. She says, we'll get local leaders working together over larger areas to drive through big pro-growth projects like integrated transport networks and housing by creating new strategic authorities, which actually runs completely counter to what she's just said. She's saying she's going to devolve power down to local leaders, but then we're going to get those local leaders to collaborate with each other over larger areas to drive through big pro-growth projects, which are these huge investments in infrastructure and transformation of energy systems, transportation, housing, you name it. Right? And that's all going to be driven through these strategic authorities. These are the new entities that are being brought in. As ever, I like to read between the lines a little bit on this stuff, particularly in the context of the war that we're currently being subjected to. Authority is the power to enforce laws, exact obedience, command, determine, or judge in a manner that is essential to the effective conduct of war. That's the way that I'm reading that. I don't think that it is a good thing for anyone other than the people who are pushing forward this agenda. What are the strategic authorities all about? Well, they list out in the bill a bunch of areas of competence. These are the things that these authorities are going to have to be able to operate within. And as I said, this is a huge scope here: transport and local infrastructure, skills and employment, housing and strategic planning, economic development, regeneration, the environment, climate change. Obviously, we've got to get that in there. Health and well-being, public service reform, and public safety. Right, this is an absolutely huge scope for these new strategic authorities, covering basically every single part of our society across the piece. That final point about public safety, that rang some alarm bells. I always think about this quote from Albert Camus: "The welfare of the people has always been the alibi of tyrants." I think that's absolutely the case here. So what else is in the bill? I'd say I normally suggest people to go and read these things. It's 330 pages long. It's incredibly technical and deeply, deeply boring, a lot of it. So maybe you don't want to, but just to summarize a few things that I picked out, right, that really jumped out at me. The first one is that these new strategic authorities are able to create what they call subordinate legislation, which is to say they're able to create their own laws. They also talk a lot about how commissioners are appointed, not elected. So elected mayors are able to appoint up to 7 people to support them in delivery of their duties, right? So the idea that this is wholly democratic, I think, is very misleading. They talk, again, as I've mentioned, a huge amount about collaboration with other authorities. This is crucial, right? So they're saying that this is devolved, but then actually these mayors are going to collaborate with each other. And they dedicate 10 entire pages of this bill to describing the exact process that the strategic authorities are going to have to go through in order to ask each other for support on issues in mind-bending bureaucratic detail. And essentially, this is a matrix. This is a mesh network that's going to be used to knit together the country ever more tightly to this centralized power structure. Obviously, as you'd expect, there's a quite a pointed reference to the imposition of levies. So the idea that lower levels of the system are going to be tapped up to provide funding for the higher levels of the system. And then crucially, there's a very detailed section about how they can go about borrowing money. Yeah, and this is crucial because all of this new infrastructure is going to be paid for by debt-based lending from private investors. And actually, this has got a lot less to do with Big Ange and the Labour government delivering for the country, and a lot more to do with delivering for the bottom line of people like Larry Fink, who we know Big Ange, Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, is a big fan of.
Ben, thank you very much for that excellent summary. Was it my imagination, or was there actually a touching of skin in that last photograph? I think maybe we should just pop it back on screen. I think the fingers are definitely touching there. So obviously there's a good relationship, and no doubt the money streams will come online in due course. I'd like to say to the audience that the summary that Ben has given there, interpreting what these people are doing, and he's given it in very simple terms, is very powerful, because if our audience echoes back to the system itself, that we can see exactly what they're doing and we know what they're doing as opposed to what they say they're doing, this has quite an effect on them. So for all the people that say, yes, what can we do? I think we can look you in the eye and say, take some of the material from today's news and post it far and wide on all of the social media platforms of the government and its agencies that are bringing in this deceptive new devolution strategy. Because once they know they can be seen, it has a deeply profound effect on them. Perhaps we'll discuss that a bit more also